Welcome to all of you. Glad to see you here. It's my privilege to be able to introduce our presenter for today. Many of you have met him and know him already, a little bit anyway. And so I'm anxious to hear from him. I mean, that anxious being, I'm looking forward to. I'm not nervous about it. Pastor John Setterlund is a member of Prince of Peace Lutheran Church as of, I don't know, a year or two ago, something like that. And I know that he was a parish pastor. He's retired, of course, a parish pastor in South Dakota, Warner, South Dakota, one place, where it so happens that a former mentee of mine became pastor long after John, and so I think she's retired from there now as well. And John was a pastor in Illinois, and he was campus pastor at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Lutheran campus pastor for 14 years. John was it 14 years, and then he has spent a lot of time in Palestine, and then became a missionary in Palestine for 2 years, or 3 maybe, 2006 to 2008. And I don't know if he can add other things that he wants to, by way of introduction, if he would do that. But I'm very happy to have him with us today. He's going to talk about, his title is "In a Hopeless Situation," and it is life in Palestine. John Setterlund.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. And I will give a few words of introduction. I've had a bit of experience in Palestine, but I should mention that the quotation, "hope in a hopeless situation," I heard it first from the now retired Bishop Yunan. And it describes in so many ways the ambiguities and the confusion, and at the same time the certainty of the situation, as it's called, in Palestine. Well, first of all, I found out that there's not always clarity on what is Palestine. And for a simple definition, it's part of the Holy Land. Basically, the Holy Land is on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, a strip of land. It's about the southern half of that coastline, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, and from the Sea of Galilee in the north through the Dead Sea in the south, and then a big strip of desert south of that, all the way down to Egypt. If you took the entire land that we now call Israel/Palestine, and you compare it to the state of Illinois, I did this because that's where I was living at the time, and slice the state of Illinois in half from Rockford down to Cairo. Half of that is about the size of that we're talking about. So it's not a huge land. But it certainly is one that's in the news, and one that for centuries and millennia, in fact, has been influential in the world history. So what is Palestine? Well, until 1948, Palestine was this entire land that I just described. In 1948, but with the cooperation and the leadership of the United Nations, that land was divided into two sections: the state of Israel and the territories of Palestine. And I say territories because today, Palestine, the way I will use it and the way the people who live there use it, consists of two things. The Gaza Strip, or what's left of it, if there is anything there anymore, and what is called the West Bank, which is it's a chunk from the central section of that land. So we're talking about West Bank and Gaza when we speak of Palestine today. Some people recognize Palestine as a viable state, and there are a couple of countries that don't. Israel, and guess what? The United States. The rest of the world recognizes Palestine as a state, and they're included in the roster of the United Nations. Not a sovereign state, but an occupied state, because they're under somebody else's control. And that is no light thing. That's a very heavy, tyrannical control of almost every aspect of life in Palestine. All sorts of legal restrictions, all sorts of military incursions and troops and armed guards all over the place. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And a surveillance system, which is probably the best in the world. The state of Israel has a spy on everything, and they know everything. But the people of Palestine still have an identity, and they still dream, as do many people around the world who know very little about it, of a two-state solution. That someday there will be two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine. Well, there is nothing left of Palestine to become a state, sorry to say. No matter how many presidents and popes and prime ministers and other people think that that is the best solution. It's not a possibility. Even if everyone wants it anymore, it's has evaporated. Okay, so much for my judgment. I am not unemotional about this. But let's take a look at the sociology of these various divisions. Well, there is a state of Israel ever since 1948. And it's basically, it was established even before 48 in the late 19th century as to be a homeland for Jewish people. The Jewish people of Europe had not been treated well, and they wanted to find a home where they would be treated better. Most of them were Europeans of various sorts with Jewish ancestry, spoke European languages. And a very unique thing, which intrigues me no end, is that they were able, the so-called Zionist movement, which was the motivation for setting up this new state, this new Jewish state, they resurrected ancient biblical Hebrew and made it their language to speak on the streets. It's the only time I know of in which an ancient language has been resurrected. I mean, they weren't speaking Hebrew in the streets at the time of Jesus. They were speaking other dialects in Greek and Aramaic and so forth. But it is the official language of Israel, Hebrew. Okay. Living within Israel, even though after the War of Independence in 1848 and later in 1967 tend to separate the people, many of the Arab-speaking indigenous people refused to be driven out of their homes, and so they stayed. So there is a huge contingent, I'd say 1 million people out of probably 3 million, who speak Arabic, who are quote Palestinians, who see themselves as Palestinians. Many of them are Muslims, and many of them are Christians. But they are self-identified Palestinians. So we have the Arab Israelis as a a subgroup in this sociological mixture. Then there's in Palestine, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. It's almost, these are Arab speakers, they speak Arabic. Most of them are Muslims, and many of them live in refugee camps, which they fled to at the time of the War of Independence, thinking that they would be able to go home soon. They didn't, and there are third and fourth generations of people living in rather dismal concrete slums called refugee camps. And then I will add to that, and I know as this gets very confusing, that in the West Bank, there are also what are called settlements. And these are camps set up by Jewish people in which they have gone and, what do we call it, squatted in property that belonged to the Palestinian people and built first camps, then villages, and some huge city right now, all on Palestinian land, all of which is illegal according to all sorts of international laws. But we know that unless laws are enforced, they may as well not be there. We experience that in so many ways and hear it in so many reports. But there are Jewish settlements all over the place. They're sponsored by and supported by the Israeli government. They're armed by the Israelis, and they cause endless trouble as they actually operate as though they have right to all the land and will not rest until Palestinians are gone for good, which seems to be another impossible dream. Well, just from this brief description, you can probably sense that there is no way to separate these different groups according to their religion or their language or their ethnic background or their politics into becoming different independent states. And the only alternative seems to be to figure out some way that they can get along with each other. Imagine that. Well, I'm thankful that there is a shred of Christian presence in the midst of this, what otherwise would be a Muslim and Jewish cultural battle. Now, the Christians, if you ask any of the Christians in Palestine how long their tradition has been there, how their ancestors came or whatever, what their history is, they would say back to the time of Jesus and the Pentecost, and so forth. I'm not sure that Ancestry.com can verify any of this or not. The languages, the motion of peoples through that land over the last 3,000 years has been so fluid, and the languages have changed, and the political dominance has shifted from one phase to the next, that to discover any real history, I don't think you can trace it to the Bible. As far as who are these people or where did they come from? There's all sorts of tradition, as we well know, and stories and legends and indicators in the New Testament, as well as the Old Testament for that matter, and in the Jewish literature of the rabbis. What we do know historically is that in the 4th century, with the Emperor Constantine, the Roman Empire, which then controlled this whole area, became Christian. And they set up an empire in the city of Byzantine, and it became known as the Byzantine Empire, and it was Greek culture. Well, I don't want to go through the whole history of the Holy Land. It's too too long and too complicated. But that Greek Byzantine Empire lasted then for several centuries until the wave of Islam came through the Middle East. And eventually, what was once a Christian empire became was overrun by the Turks and became the Ottoman Empire. I'm skipping huge chunks of history here for your sake. And from about the time of 1500, or about the time of Martin Luther, the Muslims, the Ottoman Turks, controlled the Middle East. And that went on for 400 years. So that's pretty amazing. Till the end of the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire really had already collapsed, and was then, as we know, the Europeans were eager to jump into the Middle East and divide it up and to claim colonies and things all over the place. Okay, well then, at that point, at the end of the First World War, the British took over and decided they would have to settle things. And that went on for 30 years. And there was so much contention there that the British didn't want it anymore. No one really, it's like, I don't know what it's like, but trying to juggle red hot marbles or something. And they appealed to the newfound United Nations, and they established the State of Israel and the Palestinian territories. I don't know if a map would be helpful. Probably not. I find them confusing a bit. I could pass these. I have a few printed copies. If you want to pass, take a look at them and share them somehow. It's the best I could find. And it may lead to questions. But I do need to mention, as far as the Christians go, Christianity it's less than 5% of the population in Israel and Palestine. That's not an impressive figure when we think of us as the dominant influence in the world. Most of them are Greek Orthodox. Most of them have carried on the tradition of the Byzantine Empire from so long before. The Roman Catholic Church is the next strongest group over there. And when you travel there, in the Holy Land, and I'm sure some of you have, you know that there are tons and tons of churches to visit. Many of them are Orthodox, and many of them are Roman Catholic. So there are plenty of Christians there, if not numerically, at least in influence they're very strong. Besides the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, or the Latin Church as it's called there are Armenians and Ethiopians and the Coptic Egyptians and the Syrian Orthodox, among other groups. There are also Lutherans, and there are Anglicans, and there are Presbyterians, and there are evangelical and Pentecostal groups as well, even Mormons. So now the Lutherans, they're the ones I know the best. There are 6 congregations of Lutherans in the Middle East. So we're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 members at the most. So you can see why Bishop Munib Yunan would say hope in a hopeless situation. With the fraction of people who are Christians and who are Lutherans at that is so small, you have to wonder. It's certainly a lesson in humility. Yeah, there's a very little triumphalism. However, about a month ago, I was in the Lutheran Church in Jerusalem, and we installed a new bishop. A very nice young man that I had known in his student days and had served as a Lutheran pastor in many of these 6 churches, and was now elected to be their bishop. And it was very hopeful. So that's why I say somehow the Christian gospel does maintain hope, even if it's hopeless. So it was a very thrilling experience. I was pleased to see that several of our American ELCA bishops were there, including our presiding bishop, and several that I knew, and all the pastors from there, of course, and many of the ecumenical patriarchs and delegates from all the denominations were there. It was a huge, beautiful 3-hour religious service on a Sunday afternoon with a parade outdoors and drums and bugles and everything you can think of. Well, what's my connection to all of this? Someone asked me. When I returned from the Holy Land, someone said, "Well, how many times have you gone there?" So I got up my records and started counting up. And last month was my 25th round trip. So I feel somewhat at home. And it all started way back in 1998 when I was on this 6-week study group from St. John's University. And it was in the summer, and we traveled all over the place. There were several of us Lutheran pastors in the group. And we saw and did most of the historical sites and had theological and biblical reflections on everything that we did. It was a wonderful 6 weeks, and it got me hooked. There was so much to see and do and to learn. The next year I went back by myself to try to pick up some loose ends and finish seeing some of the things that we didn't get to finish. I had discovered that besides the Lutheran congregation in Jerusalem, and also one in Amman, Jordan, there are 4 in the West Bank: Ramallah, Bethlehem, Beit Sahur, and Beit Jala. Most of those I've never heard of. And when someone told me that I met on the street that he was a Lutheran from Beit Jala, I said, "Where is that?" And he was very happy to show me. So I decided on this second trip, I'm going to try to find that church. So in 1999, I was staying in Jerusalem, but I made my way down there to the Beit Jala, by the way, on your map. If you can find Jerusalem, and right south of Jerusalem is Bethlehem. Jerusalem is also listed as Al-Quds. That's means the holy city. That's the Arab name for Jerusalem. Anyway, Beit Jala, the city where I lived and worked, is a suburb of Bethlehem. So I'm sure it's not on the map, but Bethlehem is. And it's right west of Bethlehem. So I did discover the church in the town. The first person I met in that church was this young student who is now bishop over there. So he was one of my early connections. I visited several times after that. And on a visit in 2006, I was there for Sunday, and the pastor said, "Could you come back sometime this week and I'll take you out to lunch?" Okay, by the way, these pastors are all native Arab-speaking Palestinians. And I said, "Oh, Sure. I was staying in Jerusalem, but I had figured out the bus system and so forth to travel, and so I did. And it was at lunch that day that he said, would you consider someday when you retire of coming over here and helping me in my church? What? I mean, I didn't speak a word of Arabic. They worship in Arabic, and they converse in Arabic, preach in Arabic. And I had never spent a night in that town. But he was very convincing. He wasn't about to take no for anything. So and I was approaching retirement age. So I was sort of thinking, it was actually 15 years of campus ministry that I was completing. And so I said, well, I've been giving retirement some thought. So I tried to figure out what he wanted me to do or why or whatever. But as I said, he would not take no for an answer. So he prevailed. I said, I'll think about it. Prayerfully, of course. And I said, I've got some things to do. I've got a pre-retirement seminar from the church. I've got a physical exam set up at the clinic, all these things. Anyway, by June, this was in January, by June, I submitted my retirement papers, finished a job I love dearly, by the way. Campus ministry is the greatest thing. And I, in a sense, hated to give it up. And I assured them it wasn't because I didn't like it there. This opportunity couldn't be passed by. And I was feeling somehow compelled. I'm not usually given over to visions or to thunderbolts convincing me to do something. But things seem to congeal into this direction and seem to be more compelling than my resistance. So I did then retire, and in the fall, after putting all my things into storage, I moved over there. I bought a one-way ticket because I didn't know how long it was going to be. So he said, well, could you come for 5 years? Well, wow. You know, 5 years for any of us seemed like a long time, like a risk. I said, well, how about, after thinking about it, I said, how about if we do it a year at a time and evaluate year by year? Well, that was a good thing to, that was fine with him. And I said, well, where will I live when I'm there? Well, we'll find you an apartment. Beware, though, he said, rent is really high here. It might be $250 a month. So he said, I think I'll be able to. I had made it clear to him that whatever I did, it would be on a volunteer basis. That and the first thing I did after his invitation was I went to the ELCA offices in Chicago to see the mission board, to see what they thought of it. They thought it was a great idea. They agreed to put me on the missionary roster. They agreed that since I was volunteering, they would pay my health insurance because our normal system doesn't cover you if you're outside the country. So that was good news. Free is good. So things seemed to work. And my family and friends didn't seem to be outraged by this weird decision of mine. Okay, so I ended up 2 years. As I said, that was sort of a helpful thing, I believe, because it was about that time that the ELCA was beginning to sponsor, what's it called? Something about Lutheran students in mission.
Young adults. Young adults.
Young adult and global mission. Young. And
I don't know.
No, I just went off for some reason. Oh, but no, it is gone. It's good. Down. Being fun. Figure it out yet. It's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So things were changing in the overall ministry of the church. And I was, as those students came that first year, they were sort of, I felt like I was getting in their way more than I was helping things. So, and I was a little homesick. As good as that was, and I count those 2 years as the 2 best years of my life. I was sort of ready to move home. So it wasn't any tragedy either, although they were very nice about it and they didn't want to see me go. Okay. The odd thing about this whole mission, if you want to call it that, is that I didn't really know what I was supposed to do there. That the pastor had told me, and he was, as I said, he was a local man who had been there for many years, I think over 20 years in this congregation. So things were well set on how they run. And he was a control freak. I think it's the only way you can get something done in a place like Palestine is to be very, very rigid in the way you operate. Anyway, he had done a lot for that church. He traveled a lot, and he raised to Europe especially, and he raised lots of money, which, by the way, did not endear him to the synod office. The synod office thought that if money was coming into the synod through any of the branches, it should be channeled through the synod office. And he didn't think so. And so I was fighting in the middle of a little battle between the authority of the pastor and the bishop. But he traveled a lot, as I say, and he wanted me to preach while he was away. Well, here I am. I said, I know English really well. I said, I don't know a thing in Arabic. Well, that's okay, he said. We have plenty of translators. So this apparently wasn't a problem in his mind. And it didn't seem to be a problem, except that I had to have my sermons ready word for word a week ahead, so that the translator could translate into, and this had to be into classic, perfect Arabic. It couldn't just be, the way we chat on the streets of Beit Jala. The sermons had to be in formal Arabic. It's sort of like if all of our sermons had to be rewritten into King James English or something like that. It's just the way it is. It's just the way the language is there. But we got it done, and so I would stand in the pulpit and speak a paragraph in English. Then the translator would repeat that in Arabic, and it kept the sermon short. And the people were used to that because they have lots of visitors, and Europeans especially, but many Americans and so forth. So they're used to all sorts of languages there. And I did organize. There's a boarding school, a boarding home, I should say, for school children attached to the church. It's run by the synod, but it happens to be on the property of this church. And there were about 40 schoolboys who lived there. during the school year. And I asked the headmaster, since I was looking for things to do, believe it or not, I said, how about if we got the kids together 3 days a week, a half an hour before dinner, and had evening prayer? Well, that was fine. If I wanted to do that, he would encourage it, and then he would make sure that the children came. Well, this led to all sorts of interesting things for me to learn. First of all, I had to get a hold of the student who had the best English, because they do study English in school. And one of the smartest boys who could translate the things I say into Arabic, because the little children don't understand English. So each day that we did this, I would write out like a paragraph or two, and I had to keep it simple. So you want to have your text be something that you're sure the translator understands, because the translators can really do a number on a text if they change it, and you'll never know. So we did that, and the kids loved it. I should add that half these children were Muslim. And so I also had to tailor my message to things that were acceptable and helpful and hopeful for Christians and Muslims all together. And they love to sing. And when we finally were able to get an electric keyboard in there, and I figured out how to play their music, they raised the roof. Some of the most thrilling music I've ever heard children sing. And so that was a great thing to do for me and for them. The pastor had asked me if I would be interested in teaching people to play the piano or the organ. Yes, of course. He said, because they have an 80-year-old man who's playing the organ, and he could barely function at that anyway. Imagine being 80. And I was just barely 65 at that point. So anyway, so I said, anyone that wants to come and to learn to play the organ, I'll sit with them and teach them. Well, there was some interest, but nothing very sustained. We had a broken down Allen organ that could not be repaired. So I was really quite thrilled when the pastor asked me if I thought we needed a new piano. Yes. He said, well, you go to Jerusalem and get one. So he said, so that got to be a whole adventure. I went and shopped for a piano. He came back the next day. He gave me the cash for it. I went back to Jerusalem, got the piano, put it on a truck, rode with the truck, because you have to go through checkpoints and all sorts of complications to get from Beit Jala to Jerusalem. I was one of the few people in the congregation that had permission to do that, because I had an American passport. So, but none of the children have pianos or organs at home. So when you're giving lessons to somebody who their only contact with the instrument is during the lesson each week, it goes pretty slow. I did teach a few people a few things, and I played for I don't know how many church services when the regular organist needed a substitute. That I could do. I even learned to read their music, which reads from right to left instead of from left to right like ours does. So I intend to leave some room for questions, by the way. I'm just finishing up here. While I was there, I decided I would twice a month I would write up a one-page newsletter and email it to anyone that wanted it. So I ended up with an email list of about, I think, 200 or something, mainly back home in the US. So that has ended up to be a very nice chronicle of the things I did while I was there for my own records. And I got good response, both emotional and even some financial response for that effort. We did have a program where our church decided that they would have an after-school program at one of the outlying villages. And one of the things they were interested in is having English exercises for their school children. So, and since, I was an English speaker, I was the perfect candidate for that job, and it was fun. So, two days a week, I believe it was, I got picked up in a car. I never drove while I was there, by the way, but a car picked me up and we headed out to this very distant village. Must have been 45-minute drive. And it was an all Muslim village, I found out. But they were thrilled to have something to do after school. The school systems seem to run there from like 7 in the morning until about 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon. And then the kids are done. And so we supplied them with a lunch, hot lunch. Our church was doing this. And then whatever recreational or musical or educational kinds of things we could provide, for which my English class was one of the big deals, I guess. And that has continued for several years. When I was there most recently, a month ago, I heard that program had morphed into something else, and the church had a different kind of social ministry going, which seemed to be more stable. But that was a great experience for me as well. And then finally, toward the end of my terms, I suggested that we plan a trip to the US for some of the children. So happened, you're familiar how the various synods of the ELCA are partnered with diocesan synods in Tanzania and Madagascar. It so happens that the New England Synod ELCA is partnered with the Palestinian Church. And I should give you the technical name of that. It's the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land, ELCJHL. So anyway, so they partner with that synod, and they came to visit more than once. And the second visit, when I felt like I knew somebody of the visitors, I said, would it be possible for us to bring a batch of these school children to America for a week or two? I said, well, I'm asking you to pay for it. They thought a while, and I think then about a week later, I got an email back. Yeah, I think we can raise the money. How many are you talking about? Well, I was thinking of 10. How much do you think it'll cost? I think it'll cost about $2,000 a person. The plan was to send 10 children to New England, to have them attend the Lutheran Bible camp there for a week, and then to visit a couple of churches, especially the churches that had kicked in money into this project. Well, for political reasons and everything else, we had to knock the number down to 5. Because of the 10 boys who had been chosen by the headmaster to go, 5 of them were denied privilege from Israel to go to Jerusalem and to receive their visas. 5 did have permission, however, no explanations given. There never needs to be an explanation for this kind of behavior. But anyway, so the headmaster of the boys' home was ready to call off the whole thing, and I said, well, I don't. Just because 10 or because 5 kids are disappointed doesn't mean that the 5 others shouldn't be happy. I don't know how I worded it, a little more subtle than that. Anyway, so we went ahead with it, and they had a great time. And then that was the end of my term there. So it was a little bittersweet when at JFK, when they were all heading back to the Middle East, and I was staying. But anyway, it wasn't my last trip there, and I've seen many of them since then, many times. But they had a great time. They were thrilled to death, and something they'll never forget either. Well, that ends my recollections and things. I would be happy to comment on either my experiences or I hesitate to say too much about the situation in Gaza because you see it on the news. Watch, BBC or Deutsche Welle or the best reporting on that. Question in the back.
Oh, is the Holy Land like a strategic location because it's the land bridge between Asia and Africa? So is it like very like commanding and powerful? Is that why it's when people talk about it, it's like gets so complicated so fast?
It's a crossroads between many trade routes, but it's never been powerful. I mean, they're legendary biblical reports of King Solomon make it sound like it ruled the world. But that's the only indicator that we have that Palestine, Israel, Cana, whatever you want to call it, was ever a major or important political fixture. But it's always been crossroads of people moving through.
Is there any communication, conversation between Christians and Muslims?
Oh, yes, a lot. Now these 6 Lutheran churches all have schools attached to them, and they all have at least 50% Muslim children.
Is the relationship between Palestinian Christians and Muslims tight, or is it?
It's quite good because of their common oppressor. If you get them into, say, business competition, Christians would rather go to a Christian shop and Muslims would rather go to a Muslim shop, kind of thing. Tribalism still is very, very prominent there.
Did you have any chance to be in Bethlehem at the Lutheran church there at all?
Oh, yes, often.
Did you ever learn to speak Arabic?
A little. I did learn to converse in it.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is, except for the tiniest children, most of them spoke better English. It was more painful for them to listen to my Arabic than it was for them to speak English. It was one of my big disappointments. I think if I had become fluent in Arabic, I probably would have stayed permanent. But I just couldn't do it, and at the tender age of 66 or whatever, it's a little humiliating not to be able to speak as well as the children can.
I understand that there's a Christian movement to an understanding of the book of Revelations that says that the Holy Land has to become Christian in order for the second coming to happen. And I think that might be why the United States props up Israel more than like the tiny percentage of Americans who are Jewish.
No, I don't think that's the reason. I mean, there are Christian fanatics. There are all sorts of religious fanatics. in every denomination, there are such fanatics Muslims and there are fanatic Jews and there are fanatic Christians. I think that the fact that the US has unequivocal support of Israel is purely financial. That I think Wall Street rules. And I think it's the pro-Israel lobby in the financial markets of the US. As Dick Durbin, one of my favorite senators from Illinois, said several years ago when we were interviewing him about this, he said, well, you know, the Jewish lobby is the best way to get reelected.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
So, and he's one of my heroes. Yeah.
I always wondered what was the religion of the people before Islam and Christianity came.
Wow.
Mm.
All we have the records before Christianity would be the various tribal religions. You know, we hear about the gods that Israel hated and feared. And I think I would say the religion of Egypt must have been very, very influential. And probably the Zoroastrianism of the Middle East or of Mesopotamia. But Islam itself was a huge reform movement of all the Arab-speaking tribal religions. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any communication or conversation between the Jewish church, Christian church, and Muslims. Do they talk together at all with the Jewish community, or vice versa?
Not successfully,
No.
unfortunately.
And
I mean, there are a few Jewish people who are sympathetic towards the Palestinians, and there are a few Palestinians that are sympathetic towards the, you know. And a lot of it is dependent on what works, what keeps me safe.
I know there's been a lot of displacement of Palestinians and who are refugees in Jordan. How is there any interaction or coordination between Palestinians in Jordan and those on the West Bank or
Right. You see, the West Bank used to be part of Jordan,
right?
which is part of the confusion. And ethnically speaking, Palestinians and Jordanians are the same people. But they're fighting for a very sparse, difficult turf to see who's going to get it. And you know how we don't like it if the wrong people begin to invade our land. And who deserves to be here and who doesn't. So there is a lot of tension. I do think, speaking for Jordan, that they're doing a marvelous job of maintaining some kind of shred of peace. And I think I respect the King of Jordan as probably the most enlightened leader in the Middle East. So I would say, listen to anything he has to say.
Isn't there a large Palestinian population in like Dearborn, Michigan and
Oh, yes.
that area?
Right. I know almost every family I know in Palestine has relatives in the United States. Oh,
Oh, fighting is a little squad in Gaza.
what's the question?
Oh, the news we hear all the time is about Gaza.
Yes.
Right there, that little spot. Going,
Is that where most of the fighting is?
Oh, yeah.
that's on the news all the time.
Right. And I had never been to Gaza.
That's what I was gonna ask.
I can't imagine how horrible it must be.
It's horrible on TV.
It just doesn't seem to me that any any talk about reinstituting Gaza, it could possibly work. I don't know. Well, one more question.
Okay, Gene and I were in Palestine with a group many years ago, and we had a Palestinian guide. Naim Khoury was our guide. He was Palestinian. He was a civil engineer who couldn't get a job in Israel because he wasn't allowed. And so he became a tour guide. Very good.
Christian.
He was a Christian man.
Yeah.
And where was I going with this? But there's a difficult situation in relationship. I mean, it seemed like he had to be certified by the Israeli government to be a tour guide.
You do,
Yeah.
you do.
So there's a lot of tension there, I think.
There's, when I have traveled in the Holy Land, I know the areas where I can be the guide and just show my friends around. And then other places we have to have a certified hired guide. Because, well, any country that has tourists wants the truth to be told about their country, or at least
Their
Well, I realize our time is up, so, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put in a plug here for John. I'm thankful for his presentation, but also he has volunteered to teach a Bible study during Lent. After the second worship every Sunday in the meeting room in the west end of our building. And it'll be right after the 11:45 worship, about noon or so. And it's called The Passions of Christ. Like passions in the gospel. Just a little plug.
Just in general,